get started with the Planning and Zoning Commission. Would you do the roll call, please, Paul?
Megan? Here. Brian? Present. Brooks?
Here.
Rob? Here. Melissa? Here. Michael? Here. Barb?
Here. Thanks, Paul. Any changes to the agenda?
At the end, we need to have a brief discussion regarding Burbos and Airbnbs and all that stuff, but it shouldn't take too long.
So you'd like it under
Item 12.
as item 12 and move building permits to 13?
Correct.
We have a motion on the change on the agenda, please.
Go ahead.
Make a motion to approve the agenda with the adjustment.
Tote second.
Got a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Minutes, any changes on the minutes? Okay, we got a motion and a second to approve the minutes. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right. This is a time for public comments. If you're here on a particular issue, you can wait until that time if you'd like. If you want to speak now, you can. We just ask you to come forward, state your name and address, and we limit it to 5 minutes. So you can address anything that you're interested in to the commission at this time, if anyone's interested. Okay. Looks pretty quiet out there. Okay. All right, we're going to move on to public hearing on R2 rezoning. Patrick, that was tabled on November 21st.
Correct. So this amendment proposes to add single-family attached dwellings up to 8 as a conditional use in the R2 district. At the last meeting, you wanted to talk to the developer of Aspen Ridge regarding snow removal plans should a row of townhomes go beyond 4. So Russ is here to answer your questions.
Come on up, Russ.
Hello. Russell Atkins, 8304 South Timber Oak Circle, Sioux Falls.
Sorry to chase you out on this, but the commission did have some questions on it.
No, glad to be here.
Did we have a layout of the plans that he has available?
I can attempt to find one.
I guess that my
It would have
question.
been in the. Is it in? No, it would have been maybe in the last packet.
My question was, if you have adjacent units and there's no area beside that, no green space to move snow, per ordinance, you can't put snow on another person's property, you can't put it on the street. What do you do with the snow? So that's the kind of the concern.
Well, as a developer, I'd hire a company to come in and just take the snow out. It was kind of what we would typically do. Per ordinance, if you cannot put snow on somebody else's property, these are private roads.
And the problem is, so from our standpoint, we can't require someone else if they want to do this. We can't require them to have an HOA. So for our ordinance, my concern is you might have a solution. My concern would be that that's not a solution for everyone, though. If we can't require, so we need to figure out how that works logistically. How do we write it so that it functions?
Sure, and works in all different projects. Mine being specific, where we have a private road, where some instances it could be public road that's out in front of an R2 lot. We are planning on having an HOA that would handle all the trash removal and the snow removal. The way we've got it set up currently, the private roads are all on lot. It's an easement on lots. The way it's set up, we could look at that maybe being an HOA owned tract for the private road. that's where we were headed with it, sir.
One thing I was looking at, and I don't have it pulled up here, but we allow for individually platted units with area around it that's separately owned, right? So it'd be,
Correct. The common space surrounding
Yeah.
it would be collectively owned by the
Yeah.
owner of the individual lots.
yeah, and then that would be like an HOA or something that would handle that. So that would be kind of its own lot, own property then. So you might be able to do something like that where you have the owner would only own the unit and the garage, there's just the footprint, and then all of the surrounding area, the yard and the driveway and everything
Would be a tract for an HOA to own?
would be owned individually, but that would create a scenario where you're not individually maintaining that snow, so you don't have one neighbor is good at snow removal, one isn't. You don't have the whole logistics with someone figuring out how to get snow out of the middle
Sure.
across somebody else's property. So something like that might work.
So unfortunately, we do not have the proposed layout. We have what was originally in the packet. What the proposed one would be on the city server. Unfortunately, this computer does not connect to the city server.
Yeah, the difficulty that we have by just unilaterally accepting this into the ordinance is, the lots only need to be 25 feet wide. And so if you got a 20-foot driveway, you've only got 5 feet left for each parcel to put their snow. And you still have to get in the front door. And so that's what makes it hard for us to unilaterally accept this change to all applications, because then, if somebody else comes in and they're not doing an HOA type of thing, where snow removal or yard care or whatever is provided community-wide, then we run into some issues.
Sure, I see the difference. When we originally presented to you guys to have the driveways accessed off East Christensen, we would have probably ran into that scenario. But with us going and changing that around to private roads and private streets, we kind of solved it for this particular development, but I really wasn't thinking that far ahead.
The proposal does have it as a conditional use, so it wouldn't be a by right thing people could do without taking into account snow removal, should it be located entirely on public streets.
I would think someone would have to come in front of you guys like they would for a multifamily site and satisfy, the requirements that you had for all of these items as well.
Oh, so I see what you're saying. This application that we're looking at accepting only applies as a conditional use application, not as a permitted use, correct?
Correct. So you'd be adding the conditional use, so they would still have to apply for the conditional use. So at that point, you could scrutinize snow removal and everything, where it might work on private streets because the HOA would, I assume, take care of the streets and the snow. But a public street would be kind of a different situation.
I still don't like the idea, though, that if their only option with snow is to get to the street, because you don't, I understand your situation. This is going to be handled by an HOA, but I don't really like the idea of the option being that it has to get to the street. I guess if it's conditional use and they have it set up, but I guess then my concern is we can't require an HOA. What happens, and I don't know how that happens. What happens if the HOA goes away for the snow removal? I'm kind of concerned with how that works, I guess, but
On a
plat like this, we would require the HOA. And there's language that goes right on the plat that talks about it. And it's named, so it's filed with the county. They have to have an HOA.
Okay, so we can require an HOA. Okay. Okay.
What happens if the HOA dissolves? Down the road, 20 years down the road, 10 years down the road.
It's still private property. It's on the plat with the language on who has to maintain it and the property owners and.
Yeah, I know this situation, it's a private street, that's part of the HOA, but if we were to apply this to a public street, we would not have that.
No, public street,
We
city,
wouldn't have that control.
right, city would have to remove it on a public street.
The city would remove the snow on the public street. The city would not remove the snow from their properties.
You know, I don't, in one instance, I don't have a problem with this until we get to an extreme situation. I mean, if we were talking 25-foot wide lots with just a single garage, we wouldn't have this conversation. This only comes into play when we're basically filling the entire front yard with pavement. Is there a way we can put some verbiage in here that is part of the conditional use that the applicant needs to provide, adequate means of private snow removal?
Would you want that language generally applicable to all of them, or would you want to take care of that on an individual basis at the conditional use hearing?
Well, I think by putting it in here, that at least gives us the ability to tell one person yes and another person no. That becomes a criteria for approving or denying them on a case by case basis. That someone can't come in and, well, you allowed these guys to do this on 25-foot wide lots. Why aren't you allowing me to? And we can go, well, because you have shown us that you can provide a place for storage of snow.
Yep. So automatically in city code, they couldn't push snow into the public street. So that already exists. They would be fined for that. The city would likely probably hire someone to come and get the snow and remove it, but they would have to pay for it. But so that does exist through. They just can't push snow in the street, and it's our problem. But I'm just trying to think of how the language would work, since we can't necessarily force them to do it. They could certainly push it in the street and then we deal with it, but obviously there's repercussions for doing that. So I'm just trying to sort through what you're wanting in there and whether city code already takes care of it.
To me, it's not an issue about pushing it into the street. It's an issue when someone comes in. If we were to accept this change, it's an issue when someone comes in for a conditional use. We need to have some kind of criteria that we can say yes to this applicant and no to this applicant, and that there's some backing behind it, so that it's not arbitrary. And that would be the snow removal issue. That hey, you need to prove to us that you have enough space on a 25-foot lot to accommodate clearing your driveway.
But I think that if this situation they're going to use a HOA, and another situation they're not, I think that would be a standard that you could look at. I mean, if I think I hear what you're saying. How are you going to differentiate? But to me, that would make a big difference.
I just don't want it to come down to a personal judgment decision. I want us to have something that impact, cause a lot of times we hear people come in and, well, here's a picture of somebody across town that has this happening, you know what I mean? And then we get into a bind. But if we have something in here that says, you know, this is what you need to prove, and if you don't prove it, then we can deny it. And we have something in writing that says, you know, hey, you haven't provided snow removal or snow storage. I mean, if somebody comes in and they got a 35-foot wide lot and they want to put a two-stall driveway in, then yeah, I wouldn't have a problem with it. But if it just comes down to they come in, they show us a set of plans and we say, yeah, I like this one, or no, I don't like that one. That kind of puts us in a bind that, you know, what is the criteria that we're judging these conditional uses on?
Maybe I interpreted this wrong, but Tammy, it almost seemed to me that you were saying that the city would have other means to assess this too as part of the development planning or something. That's something that you would consider as well? It's not only up to a conditional use based on some we would do. Am I wrong? Or is that what you were saying a little bit?
Do you mean as far as like private streets and how we?
Yeah, or this issue we're talking about snow removal, whether it was a private street or a public. I mean, still there'd be some. I mean, you also deal with like drainage, and snow is different, but it's.
I mean, we already have the ordinance about, you know, you can't move snow into public right of way, sort of thing. That goes for everybody, private street or public street. You know, when we have a private street like this, we do require the HOA. Now it is in the HOA, it's going to state that they are responsible for snow removal. Where, you know, can they push it someplace on site, or do they hire somebody to remove it and put it somewhere else? I mean, we have a couple companies that have asked, you know, to use our snow sites every year. We usually tell them no, but
Would that be conditional on a private street if this was the original plan, like we saw here, where it was potential of a lot of these driveways? I mean, is there any circumstance under which you'd require it without if these many driveways in one project came to a city street?
not really. I do know
Okay.
we have like a private street that we do the snow removal on, and then
Yeah.
we haul it off for them, and then we bill them for it. So I think it's a case by case basis.
Yeah.
I don't think we, as a city, have to do it for them by any means.
Just because it's a private street doesn't necessarily mean that there's an HOA that covers snow removal on the individual properties though, right?
So it depends on how the HOA is set up. So even now, when we have like a mutual access easement and we have, you know, a private street, usually we use the mutual access easement as like, you know, going through multiple parking lots. They are required now to put together a mutual access easement agreement. And in that agreement, we make sure that it does state who's doing snow removal and that they're responsible for it and that the city's not responsible for it, and that's filed at the county too. So we do cover our bases multiple times. When it's something like this and it's a private road, then they have to have the HOA, and that's when it's platted and all the documents are filed at the county and everything. So we do
Well,
require it.
It's a private road, so the snow removal on the road would be required. What I'm saying is there's certainly times when there's townhomes, twin homes that don't have an HOA. When you're looking at a plan, if I think the concern here is if something comes across that they don't have plans for an HOA for the individual units, they may have a HOA for the road, but they don't have HOA for the individual units. Do you look at that and would you require there be an HOA for the individual units? Because that's where the snow removal concern is. On the road, that's a units, the concern is something slipping through where they don't have an HOA unit, they don't wanna do an HOA for the individual units, and it's missed, and then all of a sudden you have homeowners that live in the middle, and they don't have anywhere to put the snow. I think that's the concern, if we can put a bullet point in there that, snow removal needs to be addressed either with green space on the property or through an HOA or something like that. I think that's the concern of just something not getting missed. I think that's kind of where we're coming from.
Yeah, situation if it's not as Michael's saying, if it's not on the property, if, say I'm gone for a week, and I don't clear my snow before the HOA snowplow comes through on the main street, I get home, where do I put my snow? If I put it out in the street, it's gonna be blocking traffic. And that's something that we now lose control over. Or, that's what confuses me is how do we police that and how do we control that? Unless we put something in here that, gives us that authority to approve or deny something.
So it might come down to that, say no HOA exists for the home. They're still responsible to comply with city code. They push their snow out into the street because there's no other thing to do it. They still will be fined for it. So ultimately it's on the landowner, whether HOA or not, to take care of their own business.
Right, but it's our responsibility to have a plan that works for the homeowner. We don't want to have homeowners that buy properties in the summer and then winter comes along and they're like, oh, I don't have anywhere to put my snow. So that's just where we have to be the responsible party on that end of, it has to function. There has to be either
On private property, I don't know that that is our responsibility. I mean, we have it where sidewalks have to be cleaned off, is it 48 hours within a snowfall, and you can't move your snow onto public property, but when it comes to their own private property, like their driveway, I don't know that that's our responsibility to make sure that they have a place to put snow. When we look at a site plan, we don't look at where they're gonna pile snow. We don't have design standards on where they're gonna pile snow.
I understand that, but we also have a lot of instances where contractors build things, sell it, and walk away, and then the homeowners come into us, and, I don't have a big enough deck, and you're telling me I can't expand it out into here, and I don't want a bunch of contractors coming in and building, a 20-foot driveway on a 25-foot wide lot, and then the first snowfall comes, and we got a room full of homeowners with complaining that they have nothing, where do we put our snow? Or they're calling and complaining because the snowplow is pushing the snow onto their driveway and they have no place to put it, so.
if we can require an HOA or there be enough green space, I think it just needs to be something where there's a footprint or a footnote somewhere that the box has to be checked that we're looking at that. I just don't want it to be something that gets missed. That's all I'm concerned with. If there's an HOA, I'm not concerned, but there's a lot of townhouses that don't have HOAs, so.
I'm just trying to think of the best place to put that. Is that just something that sits in, probably your least preferred option would be that just something that sits in your head to try to remember to ask at every conditional use hearing? Is that something you would prefer to go into the little box next to the use? Would you want that to appear on the conditional use permit application form? Where would you prefer that exist? Whether on a checklist or?
But once it gets in that ordinance, now it's up to the city staff to regulate it. This is a private property, it's the developer's interest, not the city, to try to design that. But once it gets in the city ordinance, now it's city staff that's gotta regulate it.
But they're all could be individually owned, which they probably will be. That's the problem. Because they're still, they're on private property, but that'd be like me pushing my snow onto my neighbors, and and not all neighbors get along. It's crazy to think.
But when an owner purchases a piece of property, an apartment, a condo, a townhouse, they gotta have broad shoulders and understand what their responsibilities are from A to Z. The city can't be a big brother to every particular problem. You know, that's my.
But this isn't every particular problem. This is something that the city has very specific requirements. And I understand that you have to scoop your snow on your sidewalk, but there's lots of places to push your snow. If we had a 50-foot long sidewalk and there was zero place to put that snow until the end, there'd be lots of problems for homeowners. So we have yards and everything else, so we don't have that kind of problem here. But when we're talking about individual owners having property that is a very foreseeable problem, I think it warrants to have a reasonable discussion about it. So,
Is it a thing where we, in the lot and yard table, we look at the width of those lots, and then in the little box next to it, the driveway may not exceed some percentage of the width of the property?
well, the problem with that would be is if there is an HOA, that's not a problem. So I think it either needs to be maintained with an HOA or have green space to support the snow. I think most time it will have an HOA. My concern is when there's not an HOA, and there are townhouses that don't have HOAs. So that's my concern if we get into that situation. It could be, I think it could be easily resolved. You can just simply require, if there isn't enough green space, require an HOA. I think problem solved. My concern is if it's not solved and the units are sold off and then there's a problem.
Okay, so all of these have to go through conditional use, right? So,
Correct.
okay, so can it be addressed at that point? That's what you're saying?
Yeah, it can be addressed at that point. I think it needs to be something that's in front of the board at that time, not something that we just have to remember to bring up, because you could just, we got this far with it without even thinking about it. So I just don't want it to be something that's forgotten.
So like when we do the variance, we've got that form that we have to fill out. Do we have something for conditional use that we have to fill out?
There is an application.
And from a developer standpoint, I think that would be a friendly way to let the developers know that, hey, this is a hot topic with us. We want to make sure you come with a plan if it's on the form. And then you can always, I mean, it might go from snow removal to trash removal to lawn care.
I guess my point is by putting it in here, when a developer or a builder or whoever wants to come in and do something, they can see this, and before they even start, they know, I have to address snow removal as part of this project. If it's on the form, then that applies to every conditional use, from soup to nuts, which may or may not even apply. So I'd rather have it in here than on the form, on the conditional use form. Because the conditional use form is the same for every conditional use.
Well, I guess my question is, I don't know if we can put it in here.
So, one place, this sounds like what Brian does not want to do, but so you have chapter 1522, roughly page 136 in the zoning code, that lists out what needs to be included in the conditional use permit application, and D goes on to say what information should be contained on the site plan. So B6 on what's included in the application says any other information concerning the property as may be requested by the zoning administrator or the planning and zoning commission. Would we want to add a 6A that if you are a row of townhomes greater than 4 units that you are required to provide information regarding snow removal? That way it is in the application, it is in the checklist, and they will know up front they need to provide that information because that is being requested by the Planning and Zoning Commission. And I completely get how it's hard at the conditional use permit hearing, because once it's 110 degrees during the summer, snow removal is probably not the top thought you have in your head.
But I hate to include, personally, I hate to include it in the ordinance just because of all of the hoops you have to jump through to try to make a change on an ordinance. I don't know if we need to go that far. If it wasn't going to have to go through conditional use, yes. But since we have that control, I just wonder if that might be a better
Administratively,
way.
I do have the ability to change the form. So if that is something you request that you want on the form, I can change the form. Now, that is an internal staff thing that would not require a change to the code.
I guess I don't care how we do it, but if I was on the other side of the podium and I was coming for a conditional use, I would want to know up front what criteria I have to have addressed before coming and presenting, and not risk a chance of being denied because I wasn't prepared to address something. And so, however we do that, I just think that needs to be communicated to, developers, builders, any other applicant that, wants to do something like this. To me, I think burying it in the application is I come from the design professional. I don't look at the application to find the requirements. I fill out the application the night before, you know what I mean? I have to go and do this. But I open up the ordinance book and I'm like, oh, here's my setbacks, here's what I need to do, I need to do this, I need to do this, and I need to do this. And then you design around that, and then you go in for your application. But I wouldn't want to surprise somebody that when it comes time to actually fill it out, oh, well, this is one of the design criteria that I need to meet. I don't look for that in the application. I look for that in the ordinance, or I look for that in the code of the criteria and the requirements, not in the application.
Well, I'm assuming that when a developer comes in, you guys are talking to him about that stuff. I don't know. I don't know what the process is, but
If someone comes in for a conditional use application, Paul, how do you go through the process?
Well, we would go through and, they would ask questions about what the board has to look at, and I'll try to go through some generic conversations about what the board may ask you questions, but, never try to lead them in one direction or not. So it's really hot topic, general stuff, not necessarily specific stuff unless the applicant asks for it, so.
To Brian's point, I will probably have spent $15,000 or $20,000 in design fees by the time I get in front of you, if I'm lucky.
As a developer, where would you prefer to see that request?
I
If you have-
prefer my engineer to know what was needed, such that they planned around it when I was looking at it from a real early stage, because we're looking at it as a business transaction, right? It's you're going to spend so much and you're going to make so much, and is it worth the risk? And one of the biggest things that we need to know is what's the layout going to look like, and if there are some requirements, like here with the 25 foot, there's some units from a price point perspective we were wanting smaller on a square footage to get the price point down further, but you've got the 25 foot minimum width. We knew that up front, so then we planned around all of that. So I realize the red tape is huge, but, to the commission's point of having no surprises once somebody's spent quite a bit of money, to come here, I think is just a good partnership.
I assume you're probably not planning on digging much for the rest of the year. Maybe you are.
We're still planning on
How
moving
time
forward.
sensitive
Yeah.
is this? If we had another meeting to talk about a draft, does that still meet your timeline?
We're pushing, we've had with the changing of the site plan, it changed a lot of the internal stuff that we were doing. But we're rapidly working toward getting some foundations in this year. We really want to be part of the sales season come spring. And it's going to cost us quite a bit more money, but it's probably worth that investment to get the momentum through the summer.
So you would prefer a decision today?
Yes, I'm still kind of confused how this is affecting our plan, but
Yep.
you
So-
asked me to come and
Yep.
I'm here.
So this use does not currently exist in the code.
Okay.
So, and this is the use that you would need to lay out your lots and sell them individually. What was approved prior at a conditional use permit was proceeding as a multifamily to allow you to build the foundation.
Okay.
And then this use would allow you then to change to it and then chop it up.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Yes.
So, in context with that, so this is an ordinance change. This is not the actual conditional use permit itself. An ordinance change would require a recommendation and a public hearing of the city council. The second reading, a 20-day referendum effective period. So, I'm guessing we'd be looking probably end of January, probably, for an effective date for this use, should it proceed today. You could still do foundations now under your current permit.
Well, the first few buildings that we're putting in are the 4-unit anyway. So I think that is a bright spot.
So ultimately, your motion as planning and zoning is either to table for additional discussion. You could, since this, make a recommendation or not recommendation either way. It's either, it goes forward either way or it's tabled, kind of.
And would we be able to make the changes to the ordinance under this? 'Cause this, so if we table this, and you want to make changes to the ordinance, where does this go? I guess.
This would morph into whatever has the changes. At the planning and zoning level, you are allowed to alter a draft at a public hearing. If it went to the city council and the city council changed something, then it would have to come back to you all. Because then your public hearing was not on what they talked about.
So if you make some changes and bring that, we can put that into this and make a motion next meeting, and then it can go to city council.
Correct.
Okay.
But this public hearing is for specifically this language to add this as a conditional use to the ordinance. If we made changes anywhere else that referred to this, that'd be a separate action anyway, I would think, right?
Yes, it would be significantly probably different. It would be, yes.
So unless we're gonna make a change that we want to actually appear in this 2 columns in the conditional use listing, we could work on that as a different action, is what I'm hearing or what I'm
It
thinking.
would depend on what the change is. There is
Okay.
that whole, state rule on, one subject. If you're pulling on too many strings, chances are you're probably touching on more than one subject.
I guess what I'm trying to say is if we intend to have this update dwelling units as a conditional use, that it seems to me we could add this section to the conditional use, and we could continue to look at some other changes to work on this separately, because that may very well end up in the, whatever, the standards in chapter 1515 or something.
The big upcoming discussion is, a few months ago, we mentioned how there's quite a bit of changes to make to our housing and residential districts, just to make sure they do what we want them to do. So that is an upcoming thing generally. So we will broadly look at the residential districts and the uses and how they work. And so that is upcoming.
So do we have a motion one way or the other?
This is Brooks. I would make a motion that we recommend approval to the city council, correct, Patrick? That's the right.
You would be making a
Recommending.
recommendation for or a recommendation against. Or
Motion
against.
for a recommendation of approval by the council.
Bassett, I'll second that motion.
Okay, any further discussion?
Do we want to have that done before we put in our concerns, or do we want to let this go with the assumption that our concerns will be handled?
I guess I'd say let's push this forward so this gentleman can keep moving forward with his project. I don't think any of us have any issues with what he's got with the HOA in place. As I looked at R3, we have the same issue there, where we allow up to 36 units. But we're only talking, what, 4 on yours? 4 or 5, yeah. But yeah, I was just looking at R3, and that talks about up to 36 as a permitted use. So we could have 36 of these things lined up in an R3 district. So I guess I would recommend let's move forward with this so he can keep moving with his project, and then we can address our issues another way.
All right, any further discussion? Okay, not, we've got a motion and a second, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, thanks for coming, Russ. I know you love spending your evenings with us, thank you, yeah, all right, yeah. Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Okay, home occupational permit for Oak Ridge Road?
Yes, so the owners of 404 North Oak Ridge Road are seeking a home occupation conditional use permit to operate a short-term rental for traveling nurses and doctors. So this is being considered as a home occupation because they do live in the house, and this is being operated as a business in the house. And my understanding is they have a walkout basement, and that's what will be used by their short-term tenant, and the applicant is here. And there in front of you, we did receive one letter from a neighbor with their concerns, and there is at least one other neighbor here that would like to speak to it as well.
Before we move forward with hearing the applicant, is this a home occupation or is this a conditional use?
Every home occupation is a conditional use.
Right, but I'm not sure this is a home occupation. In my mind, this is like a duplex. Which would be a conditional use I'm assuming this is an R1. Where under R1, let me get to that, under conditional use, single-family attached dwellings, townhomes and duplexes. Now, if the owner wants to live in one half of the duplex and rent the other half of the duplex out, that's a conditional use for a single-family attached dwelling. That's really what we're talking about here. We're not talking about a business within a home. We're talking about 2 living units in the same structure. the owner lives in and one of which they rent out. No different than if this was a side-by-side duplex. This just happens to be an above and below duplex, and we talked about this months ago when we talked about our attached dwellings and those kinds of things. I don't think this is a home occupation. I think this is a conditional use for a single-family attached dwelling in an R1.
I think it would make a difference on how self-contained the walk-in basement door is. I mean, whoever's staying there would have their separate entrance, but is that a lower level have a kitchen? Maybe not. If not, it's not a separate dwelling. It's just an extra bedroom, you know?
But then we're really, are we talking about roommates then? Cause you can have a roommate, right?
Well, I used to travel for work and I stayed in the basement or the lower level of a lady's house. I came in through the garage, but you could come in through the walk-in basement too. So downstairs I had access to the laundry. I had a sitting room with a TV. I had the bedroom. I had my own bathroom. But I didn't have a kitchen. For kitchen, I had to go upstairs into her living area, you know. But I stayed there for a month while I was working in that town. So, and paid her rent, you know.
Because what if the owner of this property rented out both floors? Would that be a home occupation?
And that's part of our discussion at the end of the agenda.
Because we allow rental properties, I hope.
We do.
And so I guess I don't see this as a home occupation. I see this as more of a duplex twin home conditional use than I see it as a home occupation. It's not business. To me, it's not a business related. It's a dwelling related issue.
So, I guess I will leave that up to you. Should you determine that it is a dwelling issue rather than a home occupation, and that dwelling issue requires a conditional use permit, it would have to be renoticed and republished as a public hearing because it is a different consideration.
Would the applicant have to pay a second fee then?
I would need to talk to this city administrator, but I would advocate no.
Why don't we have you folks come on up and just tell us what you're interested in doing, and we'll get into the technicalities here. Just give us your name and address, please.
Desiree Walterhouse, 404 North Oak Ridge Road.
It's Marty Walterhouse.
No, so when you brought out, is it a duplex? It's not going to be a permanent resident. It is just temporary, like a month or even less. So I don't think it would be considered a duplex if it's not a permanent resident.
We've owned duplexes in the past. When we go to sell this house, if we do, it's a single dwelling. It's a basement. It's kind of like what Alicia said. It's just you're renting out a small portion of your house. It's about a third of our square footage. It's not.
Not even.
No, not even that. So
Right.
it's not that big, and it's.
And there's
We
a wet
didn't-
bar down there, but there's not a full kitchen.
No.
You know, like a tiny sink.
We're not changing the whole property into a duplex or a triplex or anything like that, so.
Yeah, the second area would not have its own address, like you do in a duplex. And there's no, I used to live in a house in Sioux Falls, and whoever rented it, you know, blocked off part of it, so, you know how the older homes in the middle of Sioux Falls, they'll make a house into apartments, so you can't get from one to the other unless you go outside and go in the entrance of the other. You can't, within the house, you can't walk from one unit to the other.
There are duplexes though, that,
Pardon me?
there are duplexes, usually there's a secured wall or a secured door, but there certainly are duplexes that you can go from one unit to the other. That you don't have to go outside, there's no requirement to go outside for a duplex.
I always thought my husband and I should live in a duplex with just, you could walk from one unit to the other without going outside.
So are you anticipating that the renter would use your kitchen facilities then? Or how are you, or no?
There's enough down there for a refrigerator, small sink, that was always in that house since the day it was born, or day it was built, so, yeah.
I mean,
It's
like,
limited to a certain degree,
like there's a microwave.
yeah.
And we were thinking, like the healthcare professionals, because they have background checks already. I mean, we have kids, so I mean, we're concerned about who to let in our basement. So we thought they'd be respectable people to have on a short-term basis.
Yeah, I know the concern I'd have is what's gonna be in there. It's like, I live there. I'm not gonna have somebody coming into the house or renting our house that I wouldn't feel pretty comfortable with. We have friends that travel for nursing in Sioux Falls, and they actually said there's a need, and there is. There's none in Brandon. That's on the website for doctors and nurses.
Say my wife's a traveling nurse actually, and there is no places in a lot of towns, and there's a shortage of nurses everywhere, so it goes hand in hand. So I'm just putting that out there.
I'm not opposed to this. What concerns me is how do we protect the neighbors? To assure that, if we approve this, it can change, it can, in terms of, do we approve it and say, they must be a certified doctor to stay there? Or would the applicant be able to, rent it out to anybody, hey, we got a vacancy, somebody wants to fill it for a month. And now we start running into issues that you can have with, short term.
When this came through, I looked at it and I go, how many people are actually, there's probably a lot of people living in houses that are getting paid, or the owner's getting paid and there's someone living there. There's probably a lot that we don't know about, and this would be the exact same thing, except they applied.
We could have came up here and brought out dirty laundry on people in town here. I'm not here for that. I agree with what he's saying. It's like, that's not the point.
No, and other
And
people
it's-
did say, you need a permit for that? Like, why bother? Like, why ask? And it's like, because we do want to be on the up and up. I don't want to do something that the city of Brandon wouldn't be okay with. So, I welcome people's concerns because you think you've thought of everything and maybe you haven't. So, I guess that's what I wanted to apply to, is to just have everything looked at.
Paul, when do we go from a single family to a duplex? What defines that?
Well, I know we talked about duplexes and twin homes, but that's not what you're asking. Well, I mean, a duplex to me is, one lot, one structure, and there's no property line between them. A twin home is when you would have, two lots and in the same structure, with a firewall between them. And your inquiry was a single family.
They have a single family home,
And it was
and-
designed as a single family home. I agree
Yeah.
with that.
but when do you go from that to a duplex? I know there's probably some gray in there,
Right.
especially when you're taking a single family home and you're converting it. And you're not converting it to a duplex, but I'm just wondering,
Well,
like,
ultimately.
when is that?
Ultimately, if you're gonna have two separate dwellings, you'd have a firewall between them. So there's probably been many homes, there are many homes in the country that were designed as single family. There's a renter in there, maybe used it as a duplex, but it wasn't built like that, so there's no firewall. So unless we, somebody comes to the building department, then we can address those kind of fire code issues. So
Well, actually, a single family, if you look at our definition of a family, it includes a group of not more than 3 adults not related by blood, marriage, adoption, or legal guardianship, living together in a dwelling unit.
So draw your attention to the definition of dwelling unit. That is one or more rooms designed, occupied, or intended for occupancy as a separate living quarters with cooking, sleeping, and sanitary facilities provided in the dwelling unit for the exclusive use of the single family maintaining a household. So it would require those three things separate from another that has those three things.
The only difference here is money's involved.
Would they have to apply to have this house as a rental?
in the city of Brandon, we don't have a rental
So
program.
if they didn't live there, they could just rent this house out with no problem.
I was gonna bring
That
that
is
up.
the issue we want to discuss at the end.
Yeah, that's the point I was gonna bring up too.
Yeah.
I would be, as a neighbor, I'd be more worried about that, but I could walk out and do that if I wanted. I'm not gonna do that. But it's like,
So
also it's temporary. We talk about occupancy, it's a temporary, it's a rental. It's not permanent dwelling down there. That's the last thing I want is permanent in our basement. It's,
How are you going to get, do you have, someone in the medical field that would be able to give you people that need
there's a
help?
website for it. It's
Website?
Yeah,
Okay.
there is.
Okay.
It's called.
Our friend,
Yeah,
said she uses this
There's a
website.
I think it's-
Furnish Finder.
that's
Yes,
it. That's it.
My
Furnish
wife
Finder.
uses it, so.
That's the one I was basing it off of. What was in the area?
I mean, if you look at it, you should look at Sioux Falls. There's a lot of them, but they're all being used because the hospitals have a lot of travelers in them, even our hospitals.
There's
So-
even like, oh, sorry.
No,
Go
go
ahead.
ahead.
No, there's even where they'll rent out. You're in with the rest of the family, and you're renting a bedroom, type of thing. It's like that even on some of those. Not most of them though. There's some that rent townhouses and houses and parts of houses.
Well, we appreciate your coming. As you can see, when the commission is dealing with these things, it's not just your particular case. It's like, how is this gonna impact us down the road? And so that's why it's oftentimes very challenging. So we appreciate your coming forward.
Totally get. I just saw it 5 minutes ago, 15 minutes ago. So it's the same thing. It's like unraveling and putting together a puzzle. Protecting.
How is this different if there's a couple, guy and a gal, other arrangements, where they're living together, one of them owns the house, the other person is helping to pay the mortgage? How is that any different than this?
My daughter had that. The house was in her name, but her boyfriend lived with her. They both contributed to the finances.
How is this different than a situation like that if it's not a separate area that has its own separate entrance, rooms, spaces?
I know, one concern, and it was on the application, it asked if we had a specific off-street spot for them to park, and we do. Our driveway is big enough, for our cars and an extra car, for whoever would be staying down there.
Is it an area that's made for just one person at a time, or are there multiple bedrooms in the area?
Single bedroom.
Single bedroom.
Yeah, it's just one guest room down there.
So you're not separating off a part of the house separately. It's just part of the flow of the house normally.
There's actually two doors that go down to that walkout basement area.
Yeah.
So you
But
just.
you're not creating a separation and
No.
walling off an
No, we're
area
gonna
and
have
saying this is.
We'll have those locks
Yeah,
or
like
locks on them, but
We hadn't even
not seeking to have a separate address set up or anything. It's not a full, it doesn't have full services from what you said. It's a bedroom and access to a bathroom and a
Living
little,
area in the middle, and then there's a bedroom and a bathroom.
And a wet bar.
and a sink with a little bit of, not a full kitchen or anything. And it sounds like you're not designed or seeking what we'd traditionally think is a rental, like a 6-month or a 12-month lease. Now you might have repeat renters, I suppose, if someone came to somewhere close by. Cause I think a lot of this, Rob, you would know, a lot of these situations, they come for a period of time. Well, they may repeat that and come
Seems
down the
like
line.
usually they're 13-week contracts most of the time. And then they usually, I shouldn't say my wife does, she usually stays for at least 2 of them until she moves on to somewhere else. So, I mean, just depends on the hospital if they like it or not, it seems like.
So Brian, is your point then that it's not even necessarily a home occupation?
As long as they don't have more than 3 adults living together, 3 unrelated adults living together. I don't see how we could deny this.
There was another gentleman that, on this issue. Oh, okay.
No,
I don't
no,
think
not
so,
unless
if
he does.
anyone-
It's all good.
Hi, sir, if you just state your name and address, please.
Jim Meyer, 400 Riverwood Circle. Just have a couple things, and one of the points that Rob made, I thought was very valid. And would I prefer to see this happen? Probably not. But there's probably hundreds of it already going on in the community. I think we all realize that. My challenge, as much as anything, is how do we limit the number of people that are in the house at any one point in time? Does it now become a complete bedroom area that has 6 or 8 people staying in a room? I don't know, but we would obviously prefer to have that limited somehow. They do have a very big driveway, so if it's 1 person or even 2, they're going to have plenty of room on their driveway. So the other side being, you wouldn't want 6 or 7 pickups sitting out in the street. So as long as we have some limitation somehow as to the number of people, the number of vehicles and so forth, that would be probably my biggest concern. Our lot butts up to the back of their entire lot. So we will see the people probably coming back and forth. Not an issue. I mean, we've never met, and we're next door neighbors. But it is zoned single family, and they're nicer homes in that area. And we would like to keep it nice, obviously. The only other question I would really have is the idea is to restrict it to doctors and nurses, but how do we do that? How do we document or manage the fact that you're going to have professionals, but if it goes without having people in there, then does it slip to something else? That would be my concern. Thank you.
What if it was a contractor coming into town to build a building that they, from Nebraska, let's say? Is that a professional or not?
Well, and my concern probably more is, let's say it's a half a dozen guys, and let's say they're working on the bridge crew, and they've all got their pickup, and the pickups are all sitting in the street. Whether they're professional or not, quite frankly, doesn't matter. It's how much traffic is going through there.
But again, it's one bedroom that they're renting out, if you wanna say renting out.
Well, but if we open this up and we say we're approving it, where do we draw the line? Is it one bedroom? Is it three?
Ordinance that, what is it, 3 can live there, non-family. That's what
Okay.
protects it. That ordinance does.
Okay.
Well, that's what's in the ordinance. Whatever we do with this conditional use is gonna be outside of that, so. I'm okay with this as long as it doesn't exceed what's in our ordinance. That's what I'm saying. I don't know if they even need to be here doing this tonight. As long as we're limiting it to three adults not related by blood.
Can we have a conditional use that goes past the single family limit on the ordinance? So if our ordinance says that in a single family you can only have 3 non-related occupants, can we just by a conditional use go past that? I would think we would be limited by the ordinance, not.
That would be a unique situation because you'd be using a conditional use permit to modify a definition.
So I think my point is here that our ordinance already limits it to 3. So if they're related, so I think by definition you could probably have 2 other non-related people, I think. So we're not gonna have a dozen people living in that bedroom by law, by ordinance. So that's already the case, just to help.
Good.
You know, because that's the concern. That'd be my concern if I was that way too. But so we do have rules, and that if they go past that, that's something that we would have to look into. But so
Okay.
there are ordinance that do already cover that.
Good.
Yep.
All right. Thank you.
Could I have the applicants come back up? Is your intent that this would be rented to just one individual and not that individual and spouse or significant other?
If it was a husband and wife, I would totally be fine with that. There's no reason not to. Why spend that many weeks away from your spouse if you don't need to? If the one doesn't work, that would be,
Or if they come and visit,
Yeah.
or go
just like,
visit.
I'm sorry, I don't even know you, Rob, but if you,
I go visit, yeah, like I gotta go this weekend down to Sioux City, so that's where she's at right now, so.
I think what I'm hearing from neighbors is not so much how many people are in the house, but how many cars are outside. So, I mean, if can you foresee a situation where your renters would have so many vehicles that they'd have to park on the street? Like if there's a snowstorm, you're not allowed to park on the street during a snowstorm, and would you be able to would your people be able to always park off the street?
yeah, our driveway is, it's a 3-car garage, it's a pretty good size, but the driveway is as wide as the garage is.
And you can double.
Yeah, and right now, we have our cars on the sidewalk, in the driveway, but we gotta clear,
We're working out cleaning our
yeah,
garage and parking the cars
good
inside.
intentions, but they'll be, even ours will be 2 of them, at least 2 will be in the garage, so. Yeah, there's gonna be plenty of room.
So you have room for 6 cars in your driveway.
We could park
Yeah,
more
we-
if we wanted to with
Yeah.
a enclosed trailer.
So I think that was more the objection than how many people are in the house, if I'm understanding correctly.
It's a
Mike,
good
I guess-
point, because we're on the curve, we really don't have much room in front of our house. Cause if you park back from our mailbox, I'm right on the edge of what Francis's house was, so it's like, I'm sorry, I don't know the name of the new owner, but, so there really isn't much room on the street for us, otherwise I'd be parking in front of our neighbor, which we don't do that, so it needs to be in our driveway. We were gonna put a cone or something to designate that, so.
My concern here is I don't want us to open up a whole can of worms. I'm okay with this if they do this for an individual. If they start to do it for a couple, I start to get nervous about this. And when I say a couple, I mean technically living there. Now, like Rob's situation, you might go down and visit your wife for a weekend. It's no different than if you have family members coming for a weekend. But you don't have 20 family members living in a house. So I'm okay with this if they're renting it out to an individual, and that individual might have a friend come visit for a weekend or a significant other come visit for a weekend. But all of a sudden we start magnifying the number of people that are in a single unit. That starts to get me a little nervous as to protecting the neighborhood.
So would it be possible to say that they, and if they would consider this as a condition that the rental agreement was with one person at a time? And then we already know we have the limit of whatever, more than 3 non-related people living, but
Well, do we feel that the home occupation is a moot point? I mean, how do we want to deal with that? Because if it is, then I don't think we can dictate what they're doing if it's just a regular house. Right? You hear our concerns and how we would like for it to be. But can we dictate that?
Patrick, for the 3 non-family members, how does that work? They're a family member, so is that one? And then if they had a couple,
I imagine you would base it off of the largest group of related people would count as one. So if you had then 2 other people, even if they are related, they would not be related to the bulk group as the one that is the family. So I think that would then count as 3 because neither would be related to the one.
that's my thought. So if they were the primary, they're 1, and then the tenants, if they were a couple, whether they're dating, engaged, married, whatever, that'd be 2 other people. So they under the current ordinance, they'd be able to do that.
Yes.
And usually,
I don't see it that way. I see it's 3 people. If all 3 of those people are not related, it's no more than 3. If they're all related, it could be 4. If they're all related, it could be 5.
What's the definition of related? Blood
Related
or
by
marriage?
blood, marriage, adoption, or legal guardianship.
So marriage would
It's
consider
it's in the
related?
ordinance.
Okay,
So
so
to
then,
me, as soon as one of those individuals is not related, you cannot have more than 3.
I don't think that's typically how it's looked at, though.
So you're saying you could have 6 people?
Well,
Because
I have a
if
family
2
of-
are married, 2 are married, and 2 are married, but they're not related to each other, you could have 6 people in there? I guess I don't see it that way.
no, you'd have the primary, that they're related, so they're counted as 1, basically. And then they can have 2 other people.
Right, but if those other people are also related, do they
No,
count?
no, they're not related to the primary. And so otherwise you'd be looking at, they're the primary. If you added 1 other person, then all of a sudden this person's not related, this person not related to that person, so that's 3 people, and that's not how it's looked at. They're counted as 1, and then you get 2 other people.
I guess Patrick and Paul, you guys are the ones that interpret it, that's your interpretation.
At best, as you pointed out, when you're trying to interpret family, it becomes difficult. Prong 1 is 1 or more adults related by blood, marriage, adoption, or court order. So you could have essentially unlimited adults if they were related by blood, marriage, adoption, court order, or legal guardianship, including foster children living together. 2 is a group of not more than 3 adults not related by blood, marriage, adoption, or legal guardianship. Yeah, I would really have to sit there and think through it, but I don't know. I would probably start off with Mike's basis, but I don't know if I'm necessarily comfortable with it without thinking on it some more and trying to dig into it quite a bit, because it is a murky situation.
What if you have a situation where you got a husband and wife, legally married, they might have 2 college-age kids at home. That's 4 adults. I understand that. I'm trying to get a uniform interpretation of what 3 adults not related by blood, marriage, adoption. What does that mean? Does that mean 2 additional people can be there if they're married? Does that mean 1 additional person can be there if they're not related?
If the kids had their spouses there, those spouses and the parents of those kids would be related by marriage, so it'd still be the 1.
Yeah.
It would just be if each of those kids were living there with their fiance, they're not married yet, that would probably take you up to the 3.
Usually, like
So you
FHA and HUD have guidelines too, where it's like 2 adults per bedroom. So you can't have like, you had 10 kids and they all had their spouse there, and you had a 5-bedroom house. That's not going to work because you're running out of bedroom. You need to have 2 adults per bedroom. So there's other guidelines too that we're kind of getting in the weeds a little bit. But so there are other guidelines usually for housing. You can't just keep filling it up. But I think for this, what we're talking about here, I'm pretty sure that you have a family and then you can have 2. I'm pretty sure. I could be wrong, and maybe we need to talk to the city attorney on that before we.
So we are pushing close to 8 o'clock.
And we haven't got it.
So how would you like to
Yeah,
handle this? Would you like
yeah.
to table it? Do we?
Let's get this one taken care of because we're gonna deal with the VRBO thing down below. So let's let these folks get home. So do we even need a motion on this, Patrick?
It depends on what you determine. If you determine this should be a dwelling issue that would require a conditional use permit, we would have to rehearing and rehold the permit. You could decide on this conditional use permit on the issue. If you decide this doesn't require a conditional use permit at all, you could request the applicant withdraw their application. If they do, I would talk to the city administrator, and if it was the case where staff made them go through a process where that was not required, then I imagine I would at least advocate for reimbursing them their fee.
I guess in my mind, if they're not living in completely separate areas, isolated from each other, this does not need to come here. Because it falls under our definition of a family. As long as they stay within that, I don't think we need to even take an action on this.
And I would agree, unless when we talk about Airbnbs down below, and if we decide that requires a business conditional use, then we can circle around, but it depends on where we go with that, what that requires. I think this is I don't know that we want to get into the business side, calling this a business when we're talking about people staying in a home. I think that is going down the wrong path. I think we need to look at what we allow for single family and how we define single family versus duplex or accessory unit or that sort of thing. So I think that's more on that side of it than it is the calling it a business.
So what do the rest of you think? Do you want to act on it or let it go as just a home?
I don't think we should act on it, because I think that's gonna go, because it's just a rental, is what it is.
I guess Does the applicant understand what we're referring to here as far as the definition of a family, a group of not more than 3 adults not related by blood, marriage, adoption, or legal guardianship living together in a dwelling unit?
Do I follow? Most of it.
Alyssa, Megan, Brooks, where are you guys at on it?
I'm inclined to agree that I don't see this as a home occupation.
We don't require any kind of permit to, if I own a house and I rent it out, we don't require a permit for that. Is that correct?
We do not.
Then I don't, yeah.
I definitely agree. You don't need any type of like city approval to get on this website or anything. Anybody can get on that. Okay, then, yeah, I would agree that.
So I don't know. I
Yeah.
don't think so.
Okay, then, yeah, I would agree if it's just short-term stuff.
We appreciate your coming. As you can see, it's a kind of a sticky wicket that we're going to try to deal with, and I know City of Sioux Falls is dealing with it, the county's dealing with it now. We will get that money refunded to you. Thank you for your patience. We appreciate it. Yeah, we appreciate that. Yes, thank you very much. And who said this meeting was gonna be a short one? Patrick?
I was hopeful.
All right, we've got a draft on the cell tower.
Yep, so there's a draft in your packet, and there is a kind of a comments to that submitted by Elevated Towers, and they do have a rep here to discuss. Not the normal one, but just as good.
Craig Snyder, 2309 St. Peter Circle, Sioux Falls. If you don't mind, I'll just comment. I think Patrick and whoever has worked on the first draft has done a pretty good job. I think he's done a good job of research at other codes, and a little bit about my background. I have a tower construction company, had for 35 years in Sioux Falls, Vicor Teleconstruction, but also have the side business which develops towers to rent out multi-use towers to Verizon, AT&T, and T-Mobile. And as you guys are probably aware, I think I put up the only 2 cell sites in Brandon, one on the water tower and one out on the interstate. So you guys have gone a long time without the need for more cell tower usage, but as densification happens in a city, you have more and more people connected to that one tower, those 2 towers, and then even though you might have 5 bars of coverage, you can't really get through, and so your city's growing, and usage mostly is because of this wireless usage just keeps going up on a chart. If you think of it a little bit higher every year, and out on the south side of Brandon, there's just not as much usage, and your code doesn't really allow for tower construction right now. So I thought he's done a good job. I have some suggested changes that I'm happy to talk with you about, but also happy to answer any of your questions.
So the first part of the draft, what it does is we talked about where do they best fit. This proposes adding them to institutional. It would get over that 1 use per lot hurdle, but the thinking there was generally the uses allowed in institutional would be potentially less impactful on the neighbors. They wouldn't be if the tower doesn't work out, we're going to put up a small machine shop or something. Hopefully public and quasi-public buildings would be less impactful than just generally what's allowed in commercial or industrial. An issue too with some lots are usually wireless towers are associated with something. Our current one's on the water tower, the other one is over on North 9th Street in the industrial park. How do you want there? So there is general institutional district setbacks and lot sizes. How did you want to deal with that? So that's a consideration. So that you have both considerations of separation distances, whether you want that to be the height of the tower or a certain distance from residential. There a lot of different ordinances do it many different ways. So there is some consideration on they will be built around something. I don't necessarily think a tower's not going to fall over like a tree. So is 1.1 times the height away from a structure, does that make sense? You certainly wouldn't want it to be on a small lot, and probably even if it comes down, I don't know what the cone looks like of its fall radius. I don't know if you have any interest in protecting people that would be impacted by it, even if it's a neighboring lot. Would you want to have some kind of separation distances? I know for wind towers at the county level, they require property owner consent within a radius. And that's probably unusual for cell towers. So I'm just trying to think of ideas, because I imagine your primary concern is protecting those properties around them, especially the habitable spaces. So we are open to thoughts. This is, of course, just merely a first draft to get things going. The one thing it does add is, so when you get down to the findings required for approval, and this is item section 3 in the 13 of the packet. So one thing that it does run into is if you have to prove a significant gap in coverage and this is the only feasible alternative to do it, I do not have the expertise to review that. So in that case, we would have to hire an engineering firm. This comes from, I think, Watertown, where they, as part of the application, if the applicant wants to go that route, that they should pay for it. In addition to the just general application fee. That's a proposal. Of course, everything is negotiable, and we're just at the first steps of trying to figure it out.
Does the FCC give any setbacks from residential or schools or anything?
I don't believe so.
No.
FCC's pretty silent. You have local control, except once you get into stuff like RF.
RF and aesthetics, they speak about, but setbacks are more left to the local jurisdiction.
Obviously, you can't get so crazy as to prohibit or effectively prohibit. But you can set a reasonable standard that you think protects public health, safety, and welfare that doesn't slam the door completely.
Because I think my concern, I mean, realistically, the dangers of a tower falling on you, I mean, it's like a water tower or a lot of other things. I mean, could it happen? Sure, but I'm far more concerned with driving down the road than I am a tower falling on me. But I'm more concerned about the other things that happen with towers than I am about it falling on me. I guess, just living next to one would be a concern. So I would ask, or my thought would be more giving distance from residential, schools, things like that, giving more of a buffer. But I guess that's kind of more where I'm leaning on that side than I am about the concerns of it falling. Have you ever had a tower fall over?
They're very rare. It's like there's probably 500,000 towers in the United States, and it's probably 3 to 5 towers a year might fall, and they're going to be really old towers out in the rural areas that were built 50 plus years ago. The towers in town don't fall. The engineering standards go up about every 5 years, and each time they recreate the standards, they get more rugged, more durable, and so towers they're as strong as a grain elevator, as strong as a water tower, as strong as a power pole tower or anything like that. They just don't come over very often. Wind and ice is the thing that gets towers, wind and ice. Wind itself, no. Ice itself, no. But you add the two together, but they're designed very durable to be by county, by wind map, by ice map, to prevent that kind of a thing. It's bad for our industry if towers fall. So,
I guess in my mind, I would recommend that we do it similar to the, wind energy conversion, about 1.1 setback distance.
we'd be perfectly fine with that.
And that's from habitable structures. So do you want any internal lot setbacks? In addition to that separation from habitable structures?
That was from a property line, 1.1 from a property line.
Okay, so not the habitable structure, but a property line.
Yeah, so if there's, I mean, if it's on the same, say a school.
Yep.
Let them put up one, that's between them and the school. But, we need to protect adjacent properties and the public, so right-of-ways and other properties.
Okay, I thought you meant 1.1 from the habitable structure.
1.1
I don't think
from
I'd be in favor of 1.1 from a property line. You don't have enough space in the city to do that in most cases. Your property lines are too tight. I mean, there's too many broken up properties for a regular sized tower to be able to find a space would become very, very limited.
My concern,
I guess what's the difference then between a habitable structure and,
Well, if you had a property line that was, let's say, 100 feet to the edge of the property, but the next habitable structure was another 50, you went 1.1, and it was a 120-foot tower, it'd be 20 feet over.
right, but you can't dictate what gets built on the adjacent property. So if somebody wants to build up to their property line,
Yeah, that would come after. You guys would have to permit that then.